Welcome. Welcome to a series of conversations we call Universal Journey. It's because it's about the journey we're all on and sometimes don't notice. Here we are on this planet Earth, traveling 1,000,000 miles an hour, as Buckminster Fuller would say, with lots of food and plenty of legroom, and we're not even aware of it. Each of these topics that are in this series of conversations are each themselves a set of conversations in which I'm hoping you might feel engaged in the great mystery of your growth to your best self, to your happiest self, to your most joyful self. You'll see some interesting topics in here, I believe. They're the kind of topics you don't sit around the dinner table and discuss all that often, but they are topics that really are of ultimate importance to each one of us. We live in a world filled with spirit. We live in a world in which we are spirit. There's some amazing things happening here which we don't have to really recognize, but if we want to take full advantage of them to be our happiest, our soonest, our most joyful as soon as possible, then we will notice these things and let them sink in and make a difference in our lives. So compare this story, for example. There's a God who is believed to have set up a world in which there are things to be done, rules to be followed, and from which there is a reward to be won or a punishment to be derived. There's a fine line in the sand, a line supposedly drawn by God, over which our eternal reality is one of unmitigated pain and agony, but this side of which is an eternity of eternal bliss and peace. This world, one tiny planet in one tiny solar system that is one of 200 billion or so solar systems in this galaxy, and is itself in a universe of 400 billion to 1 trillion galaxies, this world was apparently created so that we little specks walking around on its surface would follow a rule book supposedly handed down by God through the interpretations of other humans, who differ, by the way, and each say that they speak for this demanding God. The really talented and great comedian George Carlin, in one of his classic routines tells this story. God doesn't want us to fornicate. God doesn't want us to steal. God doesn't want us to think impure thoughts. And so, George says, of this projected Christian God, if we do that, then God's going to punish us. He's going to send us into a place where we burn for all eternity, where our skin curls up on us and pus comes out and worms crawl in and out. And it is a hell worse than we could ever imagine, a pain that's horrible. And by the way, don't forget, He loves us. Well, this doesn't compute, I don't think. Here's the other story. Here's the other kind of God. This is the kind of God that Jesus speaks about. This is a God who tells us that everything is love. And this God is the expression of everything we see, everything we know to exist, and of every human person. This God is the power that set all the universe, God's expression, into existence about 13.7 billion years ago, and consciously keeps it in existence at every moment of every day. This God is love, and so every expression of this God is love. We all live within a mammoth bubble of love. But in this bubble, which is all love, we human beings have the great gift of free will, the wonderful gift of choice, all so that we can experience our way back to who we are. Never let go by God's loving presence, we are, nevertheless, able to distance ourselves a little or a lot from this wholeness of God, and for a little while or for a long while. We know that we are capable of experiencing this wholeness of God because we have both tasted it ourselves and we have recognized it as completely matured in Jesus, who told us that we are just like Him. This first image of God is awfully lame. The second image of God is really a God, not something we human beings could have thought up. That first God of crime and punishment is too clearly made in our own image and likeness rather than the opposite. A God who is a more sophisticated version of our Santa Claus myth. Sticks and stones for bad little boys and girls, and prizes for good little boys and girls. This description does not fit the real God. Our God is love and has created a place in which we can come to the greatest realization that we, individuated manifestations of this God, are love too. Thanks to a contemporary explosion of consciousness, the movement of the Holy Spirit in our time, there are a multitude of visionaries around us. This is no longer a time in which a single guru unites the world behind him or her. This is a time in which we are all called to be gurus. And if you're interested enough to think about listening to one or more of these series of conversations, which I call this universal journey that we're all on, the chances are that you are a visionary yourself. You're one of the ones lighting the path. You sometimes feel outnumbered by those who hold tenaciously to what they consider security over vision. Discouragements can sometimes come if we feel lonely and think that others have not rushed to embrace the direction which gives us strength, or the partial clarity it has taken us years to grow into. Surprisingly, though, people who think like us actually outnumber those who do not. We can't help it. It's the world we live in and the world we absorb every day. However, most of us have not yet put our perspective on life into words. We stay quiet about our growing awareness and congealing insights. We are surprised when we hear it expressed, not because this inner perspective is new to us, but rather that the articulation of our inner perspective is. Our situation takes a sense of humor, the ability to laugh at ourselves, our high expectations, and just to say to God, I give that part to you. That is your concern. When we get right down to it, aren't we fortunate to have been given these insights that work so well for us? Aren't we lucky to have the clarity to see that we are free and loved? We do not look at a newborn and say, what an imperfect creature. It can't speak, it can't read, it can't eat on its own, it has no job and can't do anything, it even messes its pants. Now instead we say, what a perfect and adorable baby. And so we ourselves have no need to be embarrassed about the limitness of our spiritual infancy. With those wonderful things we did then, we built ourselves and we grew. So we can accept our and others' deficiencies, knowing that we are all on the way to somewhere important, somewhere big. The absolutely silly thing would have to be to go back to acting and thinking like a baby now, when in fact we've grown beyond that and upon that. We may only be in the first grade of our spiritual growth curve, but we are no longer a baby. And so it is with humanity, and so it is with any church. Nothing to be embarrassed about in our connection with our earliest days, but how outrageously silly to think that we must be there in those other times that may or may not have worked for other people, when in fact we're here. Rome and all the other institutionalized and dogmatic churches are trying to demand that we go back to our toddler days. They wouldn't dare go back to the purity of infancy, which was the rather unconstrained first 3 centuries of Christianity, but this current imposed constraint won't last long. It hardly works now among thinking people. You will feel the need to keep going in the direction your conscience takes you, because that is who you are, a creator, a reflection of the big creator. We are all enticed by our inner being to live in connectedness with each other. Many may choose to attempt to forget that connectedness, but the beauty of life is that the conscious awareness of who we are in relation to others is what's important. It then flows naturally that we have compassion for others and want to help them and release them from their fears, their doubts, their disconnected from God in others. You may not feel like it. You may not experience it when depression sits in, but you fit everywhere. You belong everywhere. Who cares how many heresy lists you're on? God has no such list because God is the all that is. And this is how God works in our world. Even if we are termed by others to be wrong, or some of our perceptions are turned wrong, or even if we actually are wrong, such is always the way that the Spirit of God moves us forward. We have a garden of flowers ready to bloom here, perhaps even a few weeds, but we're not yet aware of what kind of flowers they will be or how radiant they will be. The rest of us need you. You need the rest of us. Like it or not, we hoe the gardens of each other's minds. I felt compelled to put all this into a series of conversations which I call Universal Journey, because I speak as a priest to 25 to 35,000 people each year in sporadic patches of the otherwise cohesive picture that I've tried to put together here and in these conversations in this series. Those listeners, like all of us, seek better answers to life's meaning. Always I find that most people, no matter their religion, their culture, their background, their education, most people innately know pieces of what I'm writing here, though they may not have yet put it into their own words. This undercurrent awareness hasn't matured into our cultural comprehension. Perhaps these words and this personal account and this touching of your consciousness will help organize your current thoughts and give you some inspiration. Once, a high school teacher approached me in Home Depot to say that he'd been at one of my weddings before and was so struck by the insights of how God and science blend together naturally that he has since used it in all of his classes to the great delight and enlightenment of his students. On another occasion, a funeral director from Northern Virginia, who had probably heard close to 1,000 orations in his career, called me at home from his mother's funeral in Kansas to say that he had relayed some of the words captured in this series of conversations I have here, and at which I use at funerals, some of these thoughts, to his brothers and sisters at their time of loss, and he wanted me to know how much this perspective had meant to them all. Many stories like this, over and over and over. A resonance with this perspective seems to be in most people today, though not all, and just needs to be put into words to bring it all out. And so this series of video conversations, Universal Journey, is something of a compilation of contemporary theology put in hopefully understandable language and concepts. All around us are brilliant men and women who often see clearly into the depth of how things are and then zero in on a specific segment of how God manifests God's self. There is so much going on, and so fast and beautifully it comes at us that it can seem overwhelming. I'm attempting here to sum it all out, to lay out a sort of map to help us show how it fits together today. Much of it is new, and as such will need to be brought up in discourse, argued about, and then refined. This doesn't come easy, and it doesn't come fast, but it comes beautifully. Such a task as this is precarious. There is not a body of unyielding truth to which we can refer to the answers, or to which we can really have total access today. There is such a body, of course, and it's not a body. It is the loving consciousness that we call God. But we're not yet capable of tapping into that. We're working on it. We're on our way. Rather, today, God's amazing presentation, this unfolding universe, and our expanding knowledge and recognition of this divine natural presentation is dynamic. It's ever-changing and blossoming into new manifestations right before our eyes. There is no way that any frozen-in-time culture outlook can capture for all times what is really going on in the evolving realm of existence. But it is better to update our perception of reality than to rely on others so clearly left in the dust of yesterday's perspectives. Moreover, it is just as impossible to believe that I have captured the full encompassment of current theology in this series of conversations. Surely I've been influenced by what I think important and may easily have left out something that enlivens you. One of the most significant insights to come from our current stirring of the Holy Spirit is that we will never get it all. Getting it all is the totality of God. We are not the totality of God. We are a holistic expression of God. We simply move about, experiencing the pieces of it all, and thank God for such opportunity. These conversations are not about how the organized structure of what is perceived as Christianity today can evangelize and dominate the world. Not only does that notion not matter, but it is completely out of bounds to Jesus' whole thought pattern. Jesus could have cared less about the structure of church. These conversations are about how we as individuals and all of us as society can understand the perspective of Jesus, can understand this extremely practical realization of how the universe has been created by God, and how alignment with this universal law of nature and divinity, which keep this universe in operation for its purpose, can bring out the best in us, individually and as a society. This is about, as St. Paul put it, our putting on the mind of Christ, no matter what religion we may or may not belong to. Jesus cared that we would see things in a new way. He urged us to look beneath the surface of all that is and to see into the depths of the very face of God. He operated on the belief that if we saw things in a new way, as they really were, then we would eventually make the right decisions about becoming the best of who we are. He was not a behaviorist who told us what to do and how to act. His message was all packed around the idea that if people could see the beauty of God in all that is, then they would be different, with actions naturally following. But the essence is in the being, followed by the doing. Doing comes after being. If the old law had been the Ten Commandments and multiple lists of what to do and what not to do, Jesus then gave a new law of love and love alone. When I wake up in the morning, and I would never even consider hitting my wife with a brick, because I love her, that would be the farthest thing from my mind. I don't need a "thou shalt not hit thy wife over the head with a brick," because I operate under the new law of love. It's not that "thou shalt not hit thy wife over the head with a brick" is no longer a moral law, or that it is no longer valid. It is simply that "thou shalt not hit thy wife over the head with a brick" has dissipated, faded away in the brilliance of love. Jesus respected each person for where that person was then. He knew that each of us is innately perfect, and that each of our chosen paths were so that we could experience the next step of realization of that perfection. The process is itself perfect. Jesus had unbridled respect for the unfolding of this process in each person's life. And so each of us is on our own universal journey toward the realization of our own perfection, our own participation in divinity. We are in the right place at the right time for the next big step. So come, jump in, engage yourself with these challenging and uplifting conversations, and push yourself forward to the next great step of who you are.